encouraged to sit next to the gentleman. Well, welcome to yet another debate on the city and culture, and we're going to talk about a topic which is very important for some of you, because this is about the bonds between policy, politics, and culture, and we will consider how all the effects, those good, but also the bad ones, how can they connect it with the activities of the local government, of the municipal office, how can it be synchronized and so on. I'm Artur Soliński and I work for a magazine, The City, and I watch also the situation in the cities in Poland, and my guests will be very committed persons very committed very much into the process from many perspectives, because to the left of mine there is Zina Jarmoszuk, formerly the department of the Ministry of Culture, the Heritage Department, and now the Institute of the Polish Film Art. Jacek Pluta, he is a researcher drawing conclusions from the situation, and he will tell us something about how, after 8 years, what the situation is like in Wrocław after 8 years. Bożena Bieroń, she has dealt with European cultures for many years, and the last achievement of hers is the ECC effect with Dr. Kubicki, who is present somewhere here in the room as well. There is Łukasz Medeksza as well with us, who is committed to the creation of the strategy of the city of Wrocław, and as I understand, also to the cultural strategy, to the creation of the cultural strategy. And this is a surprise for you. This is a transboundary debate, trans-technological debate. On the screen we have Jacek Sutryk with us, who is the director of the Social Matters Department of the local municipal office in Lviv. He is now in Lviv, but he represents the municipal office in Wrocław. We have 1.5 hours for the debate. There are many threads to talk about, and I want to start with Dr. Pluta. Because in our conversation, you summed up the 8-year-long process of preparation, celebrations of ECC, and now the evaluation, a process which has changed Wrocław, has changed its cultural policy. And so we said that it's a departure from the culture concentrated all around the creators for elites into the direction of amateur creators, amateur artists who emerge ad hoc, and their activities are not so much trying to make people noble, but just to deliver culture to them. I would like to ask you to dwell upon it. Why should this threat also have an impact on the policy of Wrocław? Thank you for giving me the floor. This is, I'm not really lucky. I want to underscore my role in it because the European experience, the experience of the ECC, was translated into a document of strategic nature, the present culture, and the document which is about to be finished, and the first version was uploaded several months ago. I was one of the co-authors, and the strategic thinking in the dimension of the municipal culture, this is not foreign to me. I was thrown into this circle of specialists, and I have to say that although that might seem surprising that Wrocław is discovering something that other cities have discovered a long time ago in different intensities, however, if you think about the paradigm of municipal policies as certain institutionalized processes, such processes are difficult to moderate. It's difficult to present them in the dimension of certain values that are recognized for reasonably practical in the dimension of the policy activities. We can write different documents, in other words, we can actually try to cast a spell on the reality, but certain things go by, so to say, and what was shown by the European Capital of Culture is that it is worthwhile to widen the fields of culture by new actors, and they are subjects themselves, and their subjectivity is expressed in specific, efficient activities. And just to respond to your question, all the new categories for the policy of the city involving the participants of the fields of the culture. We could actually say that we could call them the representatives of the living culture. They sort of have shown themselves in this cultural circulation as living organisms. So what we needed was an impulse from outside, because some researchers up here today showed something during the process, and the subjectivity was noticed. However, on the other side, this is what we communicate only indirectly. In general, you can say that the policy of culture of big Polish cities is changing, and in this sense, the competition is rising as well. From different points of view, it can be seen that it is not only the question whether it is worthwhile to talk about the living culture, about the animators and educators. There is a problem how to involve them into the stream, into the flow of the municipal policy, and the document, the present culture, serves exactly for this purpose. What challenges does it pose for the policy of the municipality? This must have been a surprise to you, that the living culture is there and it needs your support. Or was it sort of procured by you? Was it incited by you? Well, this is not a question that I should answer. I don't feel really bad about this question. However, if I were a representative of the organizers of the cultural policy in the city, this question would mean for me a certain dimension of change. Nobody likes changes because changes are tiresome. They are bitter sometimes. You need to give the other person space. They give rise to conflicts and tensions. And behind those simple paroles, like let's widen the fields of culture, let's widen the field of culture by different subjects, but this must be followed by specific solutions. It is not the task of us experts to show specific solutions, but we need to point out to the necessity of having them. So it's about passing on the staff, so to speak. Specific knowledge is needed, specific activities then. And then there is this dimension of policy which is needed. And I will now give the floor back to Director Sutryk. Before we do that, however, maybe Mrs. Gieroń would complement this contribution. What have we learned during our application process for the ECC? This was a breakthrough process for some of us. What I can share with you now is the result of the research that is included in the book, the ECC effect. And it seems to me that there has not been any revolution. That's our general conclusion. There is no revolution. There has been no revolution in the cultural policy. Maybe it was a sort of evolution. It seems to me that the traditional, for many years, there has been a stable approach that the city is governed by the local government. This is administration, money, serious decision, the decision-taking process. On the other side, however, there are the institutions that are beneficiaries of the monies, of the funds, of the decisions taken, artists that cannot live without the money and without the decision-taking processes. So there was a mistrust. It can be seen today as well, but there has been a certain mistrust. Those give the money away, those take the money. So those famous texts like if there were no the municipality, you wouldn't be here. So during the application process for ECC, some barriers were broken. There was an attempt to break the barriers. There is not like there is administration and all the rest. It's not like the artists only demand, or those who only demand. So there was an attempt to sort of reshape this area. What really very strongly was accentuated by our respondents, these were different persons working for institutions of cultures, but also persons involved in the process of culture. What they said was the process of democratization of decisions. This has become a fantastic value. Democracy is very important. It's not like it is all going on behind closed doors. there should be transparency. We should know how the money is spent, for which purposes, on which purposes. And the respondents would say, in some cities we have better achievements in this regard, in some not so much, but this is the reflection. It's not like there is the city and there is the rest. The question whom the city does belong, this question has been there in 2007. It is a question that was born back then. Not only in 2016. Of course, many decisions are taken in the municipality. The city, however, needs to consider the residents, and we need to have some impact on the decision, because this is our city. This city belongs to us, and this was clearly seen in the contributions of our respondents, the democracy, the participation, and the transparency. So all these paroles, people would expect that the ECC application process would change this approach, that the city would open up and would understand that you work for the people, for the artists. It's not only like a closed castle, closed tower. And two other elements are important. I have written them down. There were two questions: whether the administration is exerting your office, or is it a public service? This was the question. Maybe it would be worthwhile to reshape the administration into a public service. You serve the public. You go to the administration to be served. And people expect it, and the administration should actually change their approach. They are a public service, a service for the public. And the other thing is the partnership. You are not on the guys for the management, for the decision-taking. You are partners of the whole decision-taking process, which is a process for the city. So this approach, which I call like solidifying the democracy. I don't know how permanent it will be. I don't know. We will have a look into the cities, and we will see how the postulates and the expectations have been applied and how solid they are. There is another thing, it's the internationalization. So the cultural policy should open up the city towards Europe, particularly within this ECC process. This was a European issue, making the cities international, making them open up, making them willing to host visits from abroad. So democracy being a part of Europe, or pretending to be a part of Europe, and opening up for creating, this may be highly pitched, but creating something like Europolis. This is a city which is in Poland, however, it cultivates certain management standards of Europe. These were the inspirations and the needs of our respondents. In certain cases, this could be achieved. I remember a lady from Lublin said that the municipality changed so much, and also the Department of Culture. They quoted changes in departments of culture. Certain changes were stronger, certain weaker, but what was expected were changes in the departments of culture. Whether these changes will be permanent, we will need to research into it. These are two important threads. It's about widening the fields of culture by the activity of other actors, but also involving them into the decision-taking process. On the other hand, the internationalization and increasing the role and the weight of culture, which changes its position in the hierarchy. It doesn't rank 7 in the snow removal structure, but it ranks 4. Well, we asked straightforwardly what the decision-taking process is like, and although you can see that there is more and more involvement of circles into dialogues, into councils of culture in the cities, at the end of the day, the role of the mayor of the city gets bigger and bigger. This gentleman or the lady is identified as the institution who, at the end of the day, will take the decision, and this is an increase in the importance. The experience of participation shows that, well, there is some disappointment because the participation still makes you to go to the highest decision-taking person. The role of the president of the city was underscored by our respondents, and the bigger the role is, the bigger the feeling on the part of the respondents was that the city, the management of the city is very much into the culture. Of course, a better understanding of culture on the part of the mayor would mean a better involvement into the culture. If there was no charismatic role of the mayor, of the president who felt understanding for the sector of culture and who planned the culture, who planned the cultural activities into the future, these cities were weaker. The role of the president, of course, well, this can refer us to actually to the response that the administration will decide. The president will decide about the funding, so the president will be the person to decide in which competition the city will take part, and not activists or social groups. Of course, we know. Actually, at the end of the day, this is the city who decides. However, the role of the president was highly appreciated, and the president is highly estimated among the residents if he's open towards the culture, if he understands the needs of people and the weight of culture, the importance of culture in the city. We will go on and talk about the cultural policies of the city in this context. But let us talk now about this problem from the ministerial perspective, because Polish cities have begun to start in, we started applying for ECC under the reigns of Minister Zdrojewski, who was the one who was very much into building the infrastructure for culture on the first Congress of Culture Animators. He said directly to the attendants that he wouldn't believe into the role of animators of culture. Now, when you designed this competition, when you thought about how to do the Congress, did you expect the increase in the role of these bodies that are not institutionalized? I can only talk for myself, speak for myself. I can say, well, this was not surprising. It's a fact that thinking about the culture at the ministerial level may be a bit different than at the bottom where culture is made. What is important, however, what the lady said, there must be a person, and this person will take the decisions. As for the time where applications were prepared, I think this was a good time, and I think all the other subsequent meetings and all what happens in the cities afterwards, this is a value. From my point of view, this is a value added, a big one. Please note what happened then in the eastern parts of Poland after the competitions. I think that from my point of view, I follow culture research, and I know what is happening in this regard, what is the participation in culture, what the data are. It seems to me that there was no surprise in this respect. However, it is a value that we need to particularly, the ministry should particularly consider, because it shows you that you may feel by intuition that the researchers, the officials maybe not so much, but the researchers sort of perceive by intuition, because the officials at the central level, they do not create any culture at all. The minister doesn't create any culture. These are activities that have to support. These are supporting activities. When talking about management, you should consider this all. You should listen up and watch closely what has happened in Wrocław, for example, and also in other cities. But we are now talking about the evaluation here for the city of Wrocław. The evaluations are needed. Money that the minister has at his disposal, it's only 20% of what is spent on culture, so it's not so much. But the money is there, and some of the money, let's say over 15%, this is the money that is spent on different programs. So the money intended for competitions. And what was said here already, and what was shown as well, the opinion on the competitions the opinions are very, very varied, but there is no other mechanism. The programs as such, well, there should be a change. This should function in a different way. The changes that we have had in recent years, before the good change in Polish politics, they were oriented on combining programs, on showing the effect of synergy, on involving different social bodies. Programs would arise that were the result of long discussions. It bears different effects because we need to remember that there are certain procedures to follow. At the end of the day, of course, the decision is always taken by the minister. However, for so many years in the ministry, I have been the director of the state support of culture, and such decisions that are taken under the influence that the minister wants something, or, well, such decisions happen, but this is just a margin. The majority of the funds for the competitions is distributed because this is decided upon by experts. And this was taken into consideration. What experts? That's another question or discussion. But let me sum up by saying that many programs in recent years have been established after such discussions about the participation. They would have not been established if we were talking only about the institutionalized culture or elite culture. Some time ago, we noted that it is necessary to examine, to watch, to follow, to hear what is being said about the live culture. That's why we had this culture observatorium and the watchtower for the living culture. They were sort of intended for the local community. The whole animation movement was formalized in the process, which was actually necessary when the bill on the organization, on the cultural organization, on the organization of culture and management of cultural activities. When in the Polish Parliament the first meeting about this was organized, many circles of culture were represented, but no animators were represented then. Looking at the financial structure, looking at the funds from the ministry, there appears a problematic question for me. Of course, we appreciate the role of the living culture, the role of the animators, but activities that are there to support such initiatives were underfinanced. If you say that for the infrastructure in Poland, from the European Union, from the ministry, that we have spent in the years, I mean, we spent between 26 and 2014 around 8 billion zloty. Ministerial programs supporting the culture between 2010 2015, it was 1.3 billion. Okay, it's not important. But a program, the Very Young Culture, which serves to activate the grassroots activities, the budget of it is only 4 million zloty. And the same situation we can experience here in Wrocław, where for the activities connected with the living culture, only very limited funds were spent. And that's a decision. Do we want to strengthen this sector very slowly, or is there any mistrust whether this sector has any points at all?
Let me answer that. Let me answer in relation to the Very Young Culture, this project, and what was the main problem or issue, how to transfer funds, monies. It remains a problem. Re-granting did not prove possible, and the money had to be amassed somewhere, stored somewhere. With the Department of Culture, the institution was not in a position to transfer money. Sometimes we had to reach with our right hand to our left ear, and we had to invent strange solutions because of certain legal gaps. And we had this situation of somehow dissatisfaction. But the program was launched, and the program touched on certain things that happened in culture. It was all about grassroots initiatives, the sort of bottom-up direction, and it was also done by region. Right at the beginning of the program, we couldn't have much money. On many occasions, money is not the best thing to start. It may have an adversary effect. And we thought that perhaps things should evolve and try them out. My impression, I'm not sure whether I'm going to answer the question, but if not for creative people, we wouldn't have any as. If officials had to prepare them, we wouldn't have any. I appreciated the research that we've done, and I think artists and representatives of culture spoke about it, but we had a lot of free spirits, the so-called free spirits, who wanted to do something. There's a huge power in it. People who get established, who get settled in institutions of culture simply lose this feeling and this spirit. When we think about the various movements, grassroots movements, why did it happen, these grassroots movements? Just because everybody got fed up with little money to be spent on culture, and because of stagnation or stabilization that was not constructive. And then we had the European Capital of Culture and various programs, and suddenly these people showed so much enthusiasm, and they, in a way, triggered the action on the part of institutions. There is huge power, cultural power, in creative, independently thinking people. If they are transferred to such institutions, then we should treasure that. And this is the most important thing, to keep culture alive. Just 2 words. I believe we're talking about the reality as is. We are talking about the budget, and we are talking about some fixed item, and Łukasz, you'll be correcting me. Wrocław has a budget of 4 billion, and the biggest part of the budget is what? Education. How much is spent on education? 1 billion zlotys. 1 billion zlotys, and if we tried to juggle the figures this way, 1/4, 25% to be spent on education out of the whole amount. Another thing is the policy, the institutions of culture and the policy on institutions of culture. The New Horizon cinema, and the New Horizon cinema was made parallel to the European Capital of Culture. We have some modern ideas and concepts followed by institutions. The National Forum of Music or the New Horizon cinema are not single dimensional institutions, but they are very expensive, pretty luxurious institutions, consuming a lot of money. And we may have two orders. In one of the slides, we could see it, and we did not have a proper discussion on that. Eva Banaszak and her Terra Incognita report and survey showed the contradiction between two orders of culture. There is municipal policy, and on one hand, we have the institutions of culture and the infrastructure, cultural infrastructure, and demographic processes are dynamic. People are moving out of the center of the cities, and the policy, infrastructure policy, does not seem to be catching up. So another problem, shall we concentrate on institutions and carry out projects within institutions? This culture is going to be less expensive. There will be the sort of cost economy in it. But then we can read of this base. The National Forum of Music is not only for the residents of Wrocław. We can easily see who makes the best use of it. There are people from the region. And obviously a very populistic slogan would be to increase the budget on culture. And on one hand, we could support institutions. On the other hand, we could support new activities, new activities expressing new needs and expectations. One more dimension, proving that we absolutely need more money. It's just like the race of armament. No one's going to tell me that the National Forum of Music is the sort of cost-wise and economic institution. We'll be soon discussing what's less or more, but I'd like to ask Łukasz Medeksza. Łukasz, you were involved in this, in the writing of strategy. What did you notice right at the beginning? What did you see as a challenge during the European Capital of Culture process when you were thinking about writing the proposal, and what are milestones or important highlights? A small caveat, I'm in the strategy 2020 rather than culture. It's Jacek's domain, Jacek's child, the cultural strategy. Now, ECOC and the impact on the city, there are several drafts, and we'll be showing it in BIP only in some time. Well, I'm in a privileged position. I can tell you anything about this document. Now, the impact of the ECOC on the strategy. As part of the European Capital of Culture, there was Money and Society. That was a project with certain scenarios, future scenarios, and we used this to write the strategy. These scenarios were about the future and the city and its policies and axiology, not exactly what we are talking about here. And the second impact, the second aspect, we've already said that, and we appear to be stressing that during the conference. There was much pressure from the lowest part, the sort of, again, grassroots pressure or participative power it's an expression of another phenomenon, and we can see it in different areas, such as city management, and this is where the participative budget takes its roots, and the revival of estate councils, the so-called, parish councils or estate councils in Polish, and we want to reflect this in the strategy. The strategy is not an executive plan. We don't put any deadlines, any time limits. This is a set of various ideas and concepts for municipal policies, and we can see the increasing need for decentralization of the city. There is no recipe for the city stewards, if you like, city officials. We just showing the direction along which the city is developing. Next year we have elections, so there will be new people to use this. And we want to stress this grassroots activities, grassroots initiatives, in order to be able to build up the city system in the future, and maybe a deeper, a better, more consolidated system. So artistic creativity is also incorporated in this big strategy document. We use the label of social capital. This is nothing new. We simply outline the way. This is the independence of grassroots initiative. We should sustain it, support it, and cultivate in the city. Capital, social capital, social capital is now translated into solidarity, and we have the strategy of solidarity. Solidarity and creativity are the condition, prerequisite for successful decentralizing of the city. And that was also in line with the foresight recommendations. Just to put things clear, when you're looking about the culture and the culture to be synchronized, well, Wrocław simply invest into this living culture. Well, Wrocław stop spending money on certain things which the sort of traditional approach. I think this question is not a good one. It's not. I don't want to juxtapose institutional culture. I never said institutional versus life culture. Institution, in a way, incorporate life culture, and then everything becomes stabilized. We're not talking about bottom-up cultural initiatives. I don't think Wrocław should be weakening its institutions. That would be a mistake. Maybe the proportion in spending, the expenditure on culture, it's not exactly what Jacek said. We are going to put more money and people will be, or everyone will be happy. No, you become more hungry as you eat. So we have some new concepts for institutions. So we are not juxtaposing institutional culture versus life culture. But when we want to look at the priorities in the city policy, well, we need to identify priorities, so which aspects of culture should be supported or maybe less supported. The present culture, the small document, so that was the document year 2020 plus, and again there was a contest what the perspective should be. What we stated, culture is a live culture, it's alive and it develops, so we can't propose a thesis for the next 10, 15 or 20 years, and the narrative that was created aimed at balancing the field of Wrocław culture. Institutional culture is well established, it's set, okay? But then we have phenomenon like decentralization and migration, people migrating to suburbs, so we could somehow enlarge the culture, the infrastructure, and go beyond the center and start activities there, replicate certain activities of the European Capital of Culture. A program of grants was identified, so micro grants are repeated, and there is a declaration. We could have 10,000 zloty grants in order to involve the actors, different actors. So we need to identify somehow the identification of shortcomings and the identification of the strengths is reflected in the strategy. In some sort of soft way, we try to support where the support is needed. Now, the next problem is how to count the money needed for culture. I'm not a financial man. I'm just looking at Director Sudryk. When we looked at the money and the structure of the budgets, and we ended up with 120 million zlotys for culture, and Zina would say the money for culture is channeled in such a way, there are so many channels involved, it's very difficult to count this money. And one more thing, if we think about cultural policy, not all the institutions of culture belong to this city. And from the resident point of view, there was this huge conflict that happened during the European Capital of Culture. There was the conflict in Teatr Polski, the Polish theater. There are certain expectations of residents, and we completed a survey for the 2020 diagnosis. The cultural policy was evaluated, was given the highest score, but in the strategy, in the context of this strategic survey, strategic perspective, this policy was scored the fewer number of points. Now over to Lwów. Well, I always had an impression that the municipality was not so much involved. All things that were happening beyond the municipality, beyond the administration. And then with the ECOC, we have cultural strategy. So your thoughts, what improvements you would like to implement in your municipal cultural policy? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me. Well, we can't hear you. Oh, sorry, but we can. There are a couple of things that I can actually comment on, but in the first place, I'd like to thank. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't hear. No, we've got the sound. We need to break for a moment because we seem to be losing the signal. Is it somewhere on our part? Let's stop the video. Perhaps this is going to improve the sound. Well, I'm still moving. Okay, we're going to get the connection, voice only. Can you hear me? No, well, yes. Again, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I'm currently at the University of Lwów, and I'm delighted to take part in today's so important debate, summarizing the European Capital of Culture. I'm really anxious to be here because I'm one of the clients commissioning the survey, and I'm also one of those people who work on the strategy in the area of culture. Well, we are working together with the Center of National History in Lwów, and we were able to strike this friendship and start the cooperation because of the European Capital of Culture. The European Capital of Culture somehow operated on a cross-national level, cross-border level. There is a special tie between Wrocław and Lwów, and there were special links and special relations between the two cities. I wouldn't have been here. As I could hear, you've been wondering on the picture of cultural policy after ECOC. Well, certain ECOC was very important variable. The European Capital of Culture, in addition to the hundreds of cultural events not only carried out by the public sector, but also by self-government. But it was a pretext. It triggered a debate on the culture in Wrocław. After the project, we should be thinking about the strategy of culture. We started, well, I'm sorry, but I'll have to stop it. We don't want to be somehow misled when you say, maybe if anyone has a phone, it's impossible to talk. We can hear what we can hear is just every second word, and we can be misled. Let's go back to Wrocław, and we'll be trying to communicate with Lwów to get the connection some other way. Well, we are at the stage where we claim that the policy is about to change, but we don't know how it is going to change. So, as moment of hesitance, what shall we do now? Are we going to embark on a theme? Oh, there we go. Okay, we can hear Mr. Sudryk, but he's not. Again, good evening. A very good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen, from Lwów. Well, I wanted to make a couple of comments on different topics. Number one, the European Capital of Culture, and it operated at the municipal level and at the regional level, and in a way cross-nationally. My today's visit to Lwów at the University of Lwów, this link was established at the time of the European Capital of Culture. They were very close liaisons, and this cooperation, we are just thinking of sustaining, maintaining, and continuing. It's not true, absolutely true, what Arthur said, that we started talking about the strategy for Wrocław culture when the ECOC was over. We started talking about the strategy for culture much earlier. The ECOC was a variable, the variable that helped us to think, that provided food for thought, how to use the public sector, public institutions, and non-public sector, cultural NGOs, in order to best act and implement cultural projects. We enlarge, if we use the language of Professor Kajdanek and Dr. Pluta, we enlarge the Wrocław field of culture. We want the various institutions to carry out their projects at the level of the boroughs, or the level of what we call in Poland estates, the parish level, if you like. At the moment, we are going through a metamorphosis. It's a transformation and a process that takes time and happens in time. We can't expect any immediate effect. It's important that we've started talking and that we are all convinced in the Wrocław field of culture to make changes. Now, obviously, such changes are dependent on monies, on budget. So if we talk about the strategy for culture after year 2016, we also talk about the distribution of measures, the distribution of funds. There's one conclusion. The institutions of culture appear to be well funded, and we should join our efforts how to fund non-public actors in a better way, and that would be the focus on our strategy as we prepare the strategy for the future. do I understand it correctly, that we leave the budgets for the institution of culture, so the budget will be the same, it's intact, but we may expect more money for non-public sector? Yes and no. Would that be policy? No, yes and no. The Wrocław budget in the area of culture, we actually revalue this budget year in, year out. We start new public and non-public institutions of culture, and the budget is increased year in, year out. And in addition, we also want to include some extra activities, extra projects that are not institutionalized, that are not regular. They are projects launched by non-public actors, and we want to see more of them in the Wrocław field of culture. But what I want to emphasize is the budget for culture is going to be bigger, as it is increasing every year. The European Capital of Culture, the year of the European Capital of Culture was exceptional and unique. We got 100 million zlotys extra, but it doesn't mean that we are not going to increase the budget. The budget is going to be increased for the various activities, in particular the non-public, non-government actors. If we're stressing non-public, non-institutional actors, can we expect more money to be spent on NGOs, and what funds are we talking about? Can we expect such programs as this micro grants? Will this increase? Will you be supporting this sort of grassroots initiatives? We would like to have more money for open competition for the various non-NGOs. We'd like it to grow geometrically. This is our main concern, and I hope this is going to happen. Next year, we're going to double the budget in this area. Again, I hope this is going to happen. This will happen. At the moment, we are at the stage of planning for next year, so there are other challenges, financial challenges before us, but the budget for this type of activities, the non-public sector in the field of culture, and I'm convinced this budget will double. Today, we are working with NGOs, and we are working on a couple of other functionalities, the functionalities that will improve the collaboration. For example, we are working on the guidelines and procedures for the so-called open competitions for grants. And I'd like to launch pilots this autumn. We're going to open the last competitions during the year, so all these functionalities are expected to be implemented next year. We are in agreement, and all that's left is simply to implement. Can we talk on the phone? So as long as the telephone is on, the battery is live, we can talk. No cultural policy can it can take effect without contact with the artistic or cultural circles. When we look at the swap in the present culture, there is no effective forum for the fields of culture, participation in culture. So what does it mean, really? Can you explain? In Wrocław. When we were working on the present culture, we used the Wrocław Foresight output, and Mirek Grochowski with his Warsaw University team, so there were some outsiders who were diagnosing or assessing the Wrocław field of culture, and they asked questions or interviewed the stakeholders. And there was some narrative, in the program document you will find this narrative. There was a low level of the so-called breeding capital, so there was a little level of trust between the artistic environment, artistic circles, communities, but then we found out that the culture operates in various circles, in various communities. Certain areas of culture communicate within their own circle, their own community, but they would not communicate in cross-community. So in Wrocław, there was some need to know each other. The Department of Culture believed they knew everyone, but they would address each of them on a one-to-one basis. But the communities, the different communities, there was no vertical communication. So in order to interpret this weakness, we should be looking at the vertical structure, because we want to hear the voices of the stakeholder. And there were two proposals. Shall we say, the technology-based platform for culture, and a forum every second year, for example, to hold a forum, because this need was expressed or voiced. But one general comment, we need to bear in mind that not all communities got the representation, in the same representation. We can hear that voice, but in a social dimension, because the life culture is followed by certain functions. People have their customs and habits, and they know how they function on a social level and on the community level. In this traditional cultural dimension, institutionalized culture, we can see this problem in a better way. Now, from the philosophical point of view, when we create cultural policy, we need to leave a certain pattern. We need to abandon a certain pattern. We need to create a common forum or common platform. Well, I mean, now challenging you, ladies and gentlemen, it's a problem of the Polish city, of the cities in Poland, from the perspective of the Department of Culture, for example. We've just finished the evaluation of the Łódź cultural policy, and it was supported, but very good public consultation. I was in charge of them, so obviously we were successful. civil servants, when we say, or the workers of culture, did not see it that way. There was some sort of problem between the decision makers, the Ministry of Culture, the Department of Culture had some sort of lobby, and there were the so-called the civic representation of culture. It was, perhaps this dialogue was not representative. There were certain weaknesses and strengths of this dialogue.
Thank you. The Citizens of Culture, this is a social movement and very intense activities. This was a committee to the minister. Meetings were held at least once a month or even more frequent. There were common preparations, joint preparations for the implementation of programs, discussions. Sometimes we disagreed, not always agreed, we disputed even, and this all happens in the departments that I worked for, so I can remember it very well. The effect of it in the positive dimension was that several good programs were established that have been going on until now. So that's the plus. However, in terms of negatives, this was a group which represented the social movement, and it's not always that the social movement identified with the group. This was a big problem. How, according to you, during the Congress of Culture in Warsaw, there was the initiative calling to separate the social movement with a double line from the politicians? Are you talking about the December Congress? Yes, the Warsaw one. Because since the dialogue, before the change in government, since the dialogue led to specific programs, concrete postulates to increase the participation, why, after so many years of good experiences and bad experiences, why is there such a strong call to separate yourselves from the politicians? Well, it's not astonishing. The politics is penetrating different activities, has been penetrating ever since. We were trying to avoid it, but it was there. And I think you need to, well, the double line, well, mainly this results from the fact that certain things could not be done. You could not, or despite the goodwill on the part of the administration. Well, all the discussions were held at a certain level. The discussions with officials and not with ministers. The social movement meets with the minister maybe once in 6 months, which may be yet another mistake. Or maybe not necessarily, because maybe it's better to talk to the officials who prepare different projects and who present the projects to the minister instead of having continuous discussions. I think also that recently there have been some misunderstandings also in terms of funding. So much money for infrastructure was spent, this can be easily calculated, and special reports were prepared on this, whether the institutions are needed and whether they fulfill their role. Of course, there are many understandings, depending on what you try to examine, what you research in. But a plus of what has happened is, for me, that in the Ministry of Culture, the strategy of the development of social capital was established. And this strategy was established with in different circles, in the discussions with different circles, but it is there, it is established. Although it is sort of left unattended, so to say, and nobody notices it, that's too bad, of course, but there was participation, education, communication, and culture in discussion, the culture being a crown, so to put it briefly. And also, there have been so many consultations and meetings with different circles. Certain things have been noticed. However, the dialogue is extremely difficult. The dialogue had to go on and on and on. if we agreed that we would meet every week, every month, we should meet always, because this is necessary. However, the effect of it is that even if the officials, and this is based on my experience, even if they are prepared that there is a meeting, and they are prepared and they come to the meeting. The social party, however, well, this is different because, you know, the representation, the social representation is different, varies, and we need to learn it. We will learn it. This is what you said. There is no flow in communication on both the parties, so to say. Well, let me also add, well, the changes. I'm quite optimistic. I perceive the changes in a very positive way. Maybe that's not justified, but my perception is very positive, starting from the Congress of Culture. And there have been many factors which led to the changes in Plus. But I want to add that I remember when I was writing a text analyzing the strategy of the development of culture of Kraków, which is forgotten, the strategy, I mean. And I examined how the strategy was written and so on, and this was a classical situation where a lot of money was spent on the external operator. The operator prepared the strategy was described very precisely. Also, the evaluation processes of the strategy were described. And when preparing the text, I asked the Vice President of Culture, I asked her how it was implemented, and she asks me, is it being implemented? And then I thought that was a dead end. I myself, as a citizen, I had sort of a mutiny feeling. You spend money, you create the strategy, and the vice president of the city says it is not being implemented. So despite the preparation of the evaluation, appreciation, and so on, and then there is another strategy now being established in cooperation between the municipal authority and an external operator, but this is a civic laboratory, and all the citizens have been invited to work on the strategy. So I would say that we have learned something. I don't know what use will the strategy have. I know that the work is quite advanced in different topical segments. I, as an ordinary citizen, I have been invited many times to work on the strategy, and I went there. There were so many different people from institutions of culture, but people who are not stakeholders in this area. Work is going on. This is reasonable. However, it is a pity that we lost money on the other strategy. It's a pity that we had led to this waste. Somebody works on this and then it is not implemented, and we say, I don't know. Well, it seems that we came out of the old times where such cardinal errors were made that we should not have made. We are in democracy and we are responsible towards our citizens. This is not a state in the state. The present government performs what they said, what they promised, although you might think they shouldn't. Well, that's the last quarter of our discussion. If somebody wants to get involved in the discussion, please raise your hands, and I don't see any hands raised, so let us go back to the podium. I want to, since Mr. Duda is preparing to contribute, in the SWOT there is written that a threat is the negative impact of the conflicts all around the policy of culture. Will the strategy quiet down the disputes and conflicts? Have they been quieted down? Or when shall we expect them to quiet down? Well, the disputes are objective. They are independent of the actors themselves. Today, in the scientific presentations, there was one presentation by Maciej Kowalewski, and he said through the prism of experiences of different size cities, he showed the different characteristics or features, and he said in a small city. When we have an artist, the city boasts of him. He's a treasury, he's being taken care of and used in different fields of the social life of the small city. In big cities, however, in principle, the field of culture is antagonized. It's contrary to the government, and it's seen positive to contest the politics. And the tip of it is that I mean, the highest point is when an artist says he doesn't need any subsidy from the city. The ECC itself, this has been noted already, gave rise to tensions for this simple reason, because the circles of Wrocław culture felt subjective, and I mean, they have been have been seen as objects and not subjects. Like local artists were not used during the ECC. People from outside were invited, and this gave rise to a conflict, a tension, and this was articulated in this way. Regardless of what different concepts of the ECC were articulated at the same time, so the artists felt obliged to verify the artistic value of the program, its reasonability, its justification. This was a good right of the artists. In this connection, however, let us imagine 2,000 different events and different perceptions of such events. Of course, the number of the events itself increased the number of discussions and tensions and conflicts all around such events. And now the question arises whether after the ECC, will there be any Abschmack left, the division line or something, or will there be any natural processes that accompany this? I mean, the tensions, whether they will be transformed, transfigured into some sort of understanding and a sort of an attempt to get rid of angst states. Ewa Banaszek explored this, conducting interviews with the artistic circles here in Wrocław, and she's showing quite clearly that on the one hand, these sorrows, these objections were shown. On the other hand, however, there was a big mobilization, and despite every dispute, conflicts, and so on, the artists have shown that the field of culture has been expanded. This field has been strengthened in terms of organization and experience. So the answers may not be clear, but the threat by a conflict is present. So we were writing this diagnosis when the ECC was still going on, and it was not clear how the process would end, although there were activities attempting to create the horizontal level of communication. So I would see the risk in the following context: if the circles accept the ideas of the local culture forum, and when they continue this tradition with the local government, despite certain tensions, the result will be in plus. So we will avoid the negative scenario, according to which everybody will be offended and there will be no discussion at all. Or there will be a discussion with the selected actors in the field of culture, because that would be a negative experience. But this is an objective state. This is the status that like bacteria get some sugar and they start to grow and they get colorful. We have 2,000 events. Some potential is involved from outside and from inside. So in a natural way, there is certain friction. Per analogiam, like you organize a wedding, there is a lot of stuff, a lot of business to go about, and conflicts arise between people in a natural way. Those secret ones and those open ones. I have the impression that you release the organizers from the organizers of the ECC from their responsibility for intensifying certain conflicts or not trying to avoid them on time, okay. I have said that already, but when we did this evaluation of the theater games, the expectation towards the people from outside was that the ECC should declare on which sides in the dispute all around the Polski theater, the local government is. The other dimension of the conflict was the conflict all around the Contemporary Art Museum. Director Mankiewicz was made redundant, was dismissed. She was working with us during the foresight process. First, I would say that the conflicts were there. However, they had a different context. One party was right, the other party was right. You know, I'm not competent to speak for the politicians and to respond why the conflicts were avoided or maybe not avoided. Now, let us focus on what is coming. The awareness of the difference in opinions is there, and a new policy, a new strategy of the city is being created, and we know about the threats. The policies may not be performed, promises are not kept on both the parties, to be clear. It's not like there is a good society and bad officials or the other way around. It's a very complicated process. How can you make sure in these complicated surroundings that now we will be successful, that whatever will be worked out will be kept? When do we know that culture is developing and progressing? Sure, it's interesting. Of course, not everything can be dealt with by procedures. You can convene different bodies and so on. I have different impressions from two different events, the Forum of Culture within the strategy and Wrocław strategy within ECC. The composition there was different and the discussion was different, but it seems to me that apart from discussion spaces that are possible and that are sort of organized from time to time, the key role is upon authorities and institutions. You can write down different things, but there must be a person with authority that can be sort of the logo for the given project. So we are talking about the authorship of city policies. Shouldn't be like we elaborate procedures that will guarantee that. Now, just to have, is it not better to have the procedures that will be the guarantee for the performance of something? Certain provisions, certain rules, principles that have to bring about the situation that things are done. Well, this depends on luck of having a leader with authority. Paweł Łysak, for example, in Bydgoszcz, he was a leader who brought about a completely different reality. And when he was gone from Bydgoszcz, matters are completely different there. Now, the question is, in as much this policy of the city depends on luck. Who are you asking? Who is lucky? Well, I'm always for procedures, and I'm always for the solution that you need to have the procedures, you need to prove them and to implement them, because people change, people are replaced, contexts change. Procedures will not always be holy, but these are a guarantee to create some, to make the whole process stable. I will say I'm not. I do not agree. There is a teaching that I once got from a teacher. Golfman shows it in the theater of everyday life. He says that even the most formalized institution will create a subculture. So behind the norm, there is always a human being. And this was said in the context of the Consel affair. There was a meat producer, super state-of-the-art vacuum chambers, ISO procedures were totally precise. And nevertheless, they brought in old meat and they sold it mixed up with the new meat and sold it, the rotten one. So although there are procedures, at the end of the day, that's the man who counts. Procedures, however, are there. Now, I mean, the procedures, you need to be very careful about them, because several times already a dozen of times. We have seen already situations where processes were over-procedured, so to say, when money is involved, and in the case of programs and subsidies for institutions, such procedures at some point in time led to the situation that one of the institutions in their budget they had programs and subject-oriented subsidies and so on. So there were over 150 contracts in a year. So you couldn't process this. It was too much. So this sort of mashed us up, so to say. Now, when thinking about introducing procedures, we need to remember that the procedures are there for somebody. Now, if there is no dialogue, everything will be diluted. And one thing is important: when talking about public funds, that's an obligation, and procedures have been there, must be there in place. I mean, after different discussions that I participated in, working on a strategy and with the social movement and so on, it seems to me that conflicts are unavoidable. Procedures, if they are favorable for the officials, they are always contested. Even if they are the best, they will always be contested. If the social side, if the social party tries to prepare procedures, then they can never replace the provisions that are already in place. You cannot do it. And such discussions, such talks, such cooperation has to last a sufficient amount of time to be okay. From my point of view, we have the following situation. I perceive it in a very optimistic manner. We have gone forward, we have advanced, both the institutions, the social movement, and the private sector in culture, and also in the authorities. You were talking about strategies, that it was wasted money. I don't think it was wasted funds. The work on strategies on 4 sides, because there were lots of them, this work has increased the competences of our authorities. We have now officials, I can say it with full responsibility, who are much more competent compared to, let's say, 5, 6, 7 years ago, depending in which city. I don't want to dwell on it, because this is just the last minute left. Łukasz, there is another element of this puzzle. Elections are expected in Wrocław, and this change is unavoidable. And I'm not going to ask you who will replace Mr. Dudkiewicz, but the question is, in as much the replacement in the seat of the mayor will be significant, there will be a replacement. What will happen? What is your estimation of risk? Do you like speculating? I love it. I wouldn't assume that there will be a replacement in 100%. That's the first thing. And secondly, I want to refer to, but this is just to refer to the hope of executing the strategy. I would warn you, strategies don't have to be executed, because there are no provisions obligated the authorities to perform them. You can adopt strategies as the authority, but you don't have to perform it. And this is a very very simple principle that doesn't seem to be changed. There is a new national strategy of responsible development, which has finished the existence of all the other strategies, like the strategy of the development of social capital, but the minister still reports on the performance of the strategy of the social development. But nobody cares. The strategy of the responsible development, it states clearly that all the other government strategies are terminated, since all the strategies will be prepared anew.
How about Wrocław? What is it going to be like in Wrocław? Well, Wrocław, well, we have deviated from the political reality, and the political reality in Wrocław is the time of turbulences. We don't know how long these turbulences will last. I think it will be 5, 10 years, so it's not a private opinion, because you have just voiced your opinion. It's a public opinion now. Of course, we don't know what will happen in a year, in 1.5 years. We don't know what the trends will be. We don't know what the political will be, and what the surrounding fields will be on the national and international level, because this surrounding is varying, and this is one of the results of our foresights. The political and economical reality is so dynamic and changing that we are not able to forecast what's going to happen in a year. We are not able to do it for the next months to come, and you can forget about years. We are also talking about a very strong trend, out of which grassroots participation emerges. But we don't know whether this trend will not go backwards and will be replaced by some other models, or maybe a model of centralized activities. This may be based on different premises. Of course, local government elections will tell you a lot. The results of the individual election committees will tell you a lot in individual cities, and we will see how different proposals, grassroots proposals, will be treated during the elections. Now it's just a guess. We don't know really, nothing. That's the nature of the matter of our discussion. But nevertheless, we should try. When we already have talked about the grassroots involvement, maybe we should continue this. These are the last seconds of our debate. Thank you to you. I encouraged you to raise your hands and to take the opportunity to talk. Maybe in the lobby there will be a discussion, and the organizers should explain now what will happen next, because that's not the end. Thank you very much indeed now.